This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. We're taking a deep dive into a few stories tonight, but first, here's what's happening. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison announced today he's elevating charges against the Minnesota police officer accused of killing George Floyd. He's also bringing new charges of aiding and abetting murder against 3 other officers who were at the scene, which is something protesters have demanded since Floyd's death.
I strongly believe that these developments are in the interest of justice for Mr. Floyd, his family, our community, and our state.
Ellison was tapped by Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to take over prosecution Sunday. Demanding justice for George Floyd and other victims of police brutality doesn't stop at our borders. In Paris, demonstrations there reignited calls for justice related to the death of a black man who died in police custody in 2016. Demonstrators, including actor John Boyega, gathered in London's Hyde Park.
More education, black awareness. Yes. I want to be able to have that in this country.
Defense Secretary Mark Esper says he's against invoking the Insurrection Act, which would allow the president to deploy active duty troops to counter protests, something a state's governor would typically need to request.
The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort and only in the most urgent and dire of situations. We are not in one of those situations now.
This comes after President Trump threatened to send troops into states to handle protests. The Insurrection Act hasn't been used since 1992 during the Rodney King riots in LA. These demonstrations can get chaotic. That's something we've seen over the past week, and if not for videos of protesters calling out agitators and actually delivering them to law enforcement, it might be a little hard to tell who is who. Newsy's Sasha Ingberg gives us a breakdown of some of the extremist groups working to incite even more violence during these protests.
Who is behind the violence and vandalism at the protests for George Floyd? The Trump administration has been quick to blame the far left.
It's the violent Antifa radical militants that are coming out under cover of night, traveling across state lines, using military-style tactics to burn down our cities.
But analysts and authorities on the ground paint a far more complicated picture, and the FBI is appealing to the public for help.
Violent extremism in the United States is hyper-fluid. These groups overlap, interact, merge, splinter, emerge.
Antifa, short for anti-fascist, started in 1960s Europe. Experts on extremism describe it as a non-hierarchical, loose group that often gets into skirmishes with neo-Nazis and white supremacists. After peaceful demonstrations escalated, President Donald Trump declared his intention to designate Antifa a terrorist organization.
There are no domestic terrorist organizations identified by the U.S. government. In terms of categorizing Antifa, most analysts don't describe them as terrorists in nature. They do not seem to be engaging in premeditated violent attacks on symbolic targets, on civilian populations.
Another left-wing group accused by authorities, including New York Mayor Bill de Blasio, anarchists who allegedly damaged corporate and government property.
But other authorities, like the mayor of Minneapolis, where Floyd was killed in police custody, say far-right groups are sowing chaos.
They believe, and this goes back to President Obama's election, that there's a white genocide afoot.
The Boogaloo, originally a genre of Latin music and dance, is now a code word used by Hawaiian shirt-wearing pro-gun activists calling for a second civil war. Members of the movement protested COVID-19 lockdowns, and in May, police charged one adherent in Texas with plotting to kill officers. There's also Identity Europa, now rebranded as the American Identity Movement. Twitter recently told the media it suspended an account linked to the group, which posed as Antifa and promoted violence at the George Floyd protests. Founded by an Iraq War veteran, its followers chanted, "Jews will not replace us," at the fatal Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville in 2017. Taken together, analysts say they're seeing an alarming trend.
Over recent years, terrorism has become more partisan in the United States, where individuals have carried out acts of violence on behalf of one of the two political parties or candidates.
According to the Anti-Defamation League, 90% of extremist groups last year were linked to right-wing groups.
The center is concerned about the distraction that the Trump administration has caused. It's not about Antifa disrupting protesters. It's about the message of the protesters being able to get through.
Sasha Ingber, Newsy, Washington.
The wheels of justice turn slowly, but those wheels have turned a little faster in some cities since protests began. We'll see you in just a sec.
As coronavirus spreads across the country, you might be looking for ways to make sense of it all. Newsy is here to help with some deeper context, explaining and reporting on the pandemic. Virology, only on Newsy. Be informed, not influenced.
Every patient was a dollar sign.
I do not think I was an aggressive dentist.
Losing your perfectly healthy teeth. How dare you try to do that to me?
Nothing's wrong with making money. If you're doing it ethically, absolutely not.
Google can tell us a lot of things, like what stores are actually open right now, or where to buy face masks, or the answer to a lot of extremely dark questions in 2020. And Google's trends can tell us what other people are curious about, which is pretty interesting, especially right now. Here's a quick look. People are searching Keke Palmer's name after this video went viral, showing the actress in conversation with National Guardsmen, asking them to join a protest march in Hollywood. Eventually, another woman in the video asks the guardmen to take a knee in solidarity, which they do.
Can you do me a favor? Can you take a kneel? Can you take a kneel?
I don't know. They ain't enough for me.
They ain't enough for me.
Palmer herself wasn't satisfied with the guardsmen's response, which goes to show the complicated tension between protesters and the people called in to control or counter those protests. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is trending after this epically long pause he took when asked about what's going on in the US, which actually says a lot.
I'd like to ask you what you think about that, and if you don't want to comment, what message do you think you're sending?
We all watch in horror and consternation what's going on in the United States.
And more than 500,000 people are searching the term martial law for obvious reasons. Martial law is when the military has direct control over normal civil functions, which is not technically where we're at now, though it certainly doesn't seem far from reality in some major cities. Believe it or not, some real change is actually coming out of these protests across the country, which is exactly what some demonstrators are calling for. Jamal Andrews takes a look at where that change is happening.
As protesters across the country continue to call for change, signs of a shifting tide are appearing in Atlanta.
I feel a little safer now that these monsters are off of the street and no longer able to terrorize anyone else from this point on.
6 Atlanta police officers have been charged after a graphic body camera video surfaced showing them tasing and dragging Messiah Young and Tanaya Pilgrim from their car in traffic Saturday night. We want to warn you that this footage is hard to watch. The officers involved are facing charges that range from aggravated assault and aggravated battery to pointing a gun. Across the country, activists are seeking to hold law enforcement accountable for bad policing practices. In some communities, they're getting action. In Ohio, the NAACP is working to gather local leaders and lawmakers for a Justice Summit on June 10th, according to News 5 Cleveland. The summit aims to look to change Ohio laws to hold officers accountable in incidents of excessive force. In Michigan, the Southfield Police Department has announced it has begun implementing a new policy that it calls the, quote, duty to intervene. It requires an officer to step in if they witness another officer doing something illegal.
I'm going to say it again. Fail to have the courage to intervene, you will be held accountable.
Activist DeRay McKesson has been working to enact police reform since 2014, and he tells Newsy there are several policies every police department should have in place to better protect the community.
There are really simple things like banning chokeholds, right? Like requiring officers to intervene if they see that another officer is engaged in wrongdoing. These things are simple, requiring de-escalation, that an officer has to exhaust all other means before they use deadly force.
The Minneapolis PD is one of several police departments around the country that allows its officers to use chokeholds and neck restraints when making an arrest.
That like the solutions are simple. The hard part is that we do not have political leaders with the courage to implement them. That's it.
An NBC News analysis found the neck restraint tactic that Officer Derek Chauvin used on George Floyd before he died has been used by the Minneapolis Police Department at least 237 times since the start of 2015. 44 of those resulted in unconsciousness. As activists continue to protest and demand structural change, many are expressing hope that lawmakers and law enforcement are listening. But for now, protests show no signs of slowing down. Jamal Andrus, Newsy, Chicago.
All right, we're halfway through the show, so we'll give you a few quick moments to run to the restroom. We'll be here when you get back.
When you see a ghost forest for the first time, you're struck by how eerie it is. We've got dead trees that mark where the land was 10, 20, 50 years ago. They're the most striking indicator that I know of climate change anywhere on the East Coast.
Sure. Memes and cat videos are fun, but actual news might be a bit more useful. Follow Newsy on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get straightforward, opinion-free news right on your social news feed.
Conversations around COVID-19 and clashes between protesters and police are already tough enough between us grown-ups. But then there's having that talk with children. Newsy's Amy Morona spoke with some experts on how honesty is how parents and guardians should approach these difficult conversations with kids.
Your children are watching. They're watching. And what you do will plant the seed for what they do or don't do in the future.
As Arizona State Professor Rashad Shabazz told our sister station KNXV, kids are watching, and things they may have been witnessing lately include the coronavirus pandemic, the recent deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and protests coast to coast. All heavy events parents must figure out how to appropriately discuss with them.
My children are brown children. They need to know that the system and the society is racist. That doesn't mean everyone is racist, but that means that there are racist systems and racist beliefs that people hold, and it's our job as people of color, right, or our responsibility to try to help that as much as we can. And we also have to be prepared to be able to navigate it, survive it, but that's not enough, right? We have to change it, right?
Joe Truss's children are young now, but he says he plans on being direct when talking with them about the world they live in. Experts say candor can be a good strategy when talking to kids.
This is a time for honesty, and really honesty about your own family values and belief systems. And those might even be different within a family or between generations of family members. But I think children should know that people can have different opinions and beliefs. And how can we listen to each other and respect each other rather than dividing each other?
A 2017 report found that 48% of kids surveyed said following the news is important to them, though 63% said it makes them feel sad or angry. And it's okay for parents to admit they're still processing thoughts and feelings, too.
Just the main thing is to reassure them that we are adults, we're figuring this out, we will keep you safe, that is our job.
But teenagers, tweens, and young children all react to traumatic events differently. Children may throw temper tantrums or be clingy with parents, while older kids may experience anxiety or sadness, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics. And older kids may be spending more time on social media. A 2019 report found teens spent more than 7 hours a day looking at a screen, something that parents may want to be aware of right now.
One has to negotiate that very carefully so that as they try to protect young people from some of the things that they see on social media, that they also don't eliminate the sources of normal peer interaction and support that they need during this time when they're not going to school, not going to sports, not going to social clubs. So it's it's tricky to navigate.
Amy Morona, Newsy, Washington.
When we're back, we'll talk about how Stan accounts have gone from obsessively amplifying celebrities to spreading messages of social justice. It's okay to be a little surprised here.
At Newsy, we're focused on facts and solutions.
Talking with medical workers on the front lines, decision makers, and everyday people.
All of us fighting COVID-19.
Newsy, be informed, not influenced.
Celebrity stan accounts, or stalker fan accounts, can tap into pretty obsessive fan bases. Just today, K-pop stans took over the White Lives Matter hashtag on Twitter, and instead of racist messages, people who clicked on the hashtag are seeing K-pop fan cams. But what happens when those account operators turn the attention of 600,000 followers from, let's say, K-pop group BTS to social justice issues? Newsy's Casey Mendoza takes a closer look.
This is our America!
Celebrities like Tessa Thompson, Timothée Chalamet, and Beyoncé are using their platforms to speak out against racial injustice.
There have been too many times that we've seen these violent killings and no consequences.
But beyond the direct actions and words of Hollywood stars, some of the internet's biggest unofficial fandom groups are using their own platforms to direct attention to the protest movements. Though seemingly innocuous, online fan groups or stan accounts for musicians like Beyoncé and shows like Brooklyn Nine-Nine have upwards of 200,000 followers and heavily influence the entertainment industry. Fans' sudden shifts from inside jokes or comedic screen grabs to bail fundraisers and petitions shows how the in-person protests have manifested online. One of the biggest fandom groups in the US is the BTS Army, dedicated to the South Korean pop group BTS. The fan account has more than 500,000 followers on Twitter, and it announced on Sunday that it is canceling its virtual Spirit event to support the Black Lives Matter movement. Beyond focusing attention on the protests, K-pop fans also spammed the iWatch Dallas app with concert videos. The app, which was used by the Dallas Police Department to identify illegal activity from the protests, was shut down following the fans' coordinated spamming efforts. Casey Mendoza, Newsy, Chicago.
All right, we're in the curfew, so we need to go ahead and wrap this up. But join us again tomorrow, same time, same place for more In the Loop. But if you haven't quite gotten your news fix yet, stick around. More top stories from Newsy are coming your way.